Hey Script Apart listeners, welcome back to another episode of this podcast about the first draft secrets of great movies and TV shows. My name's Al Horner, and this week on the show, we're delving deep, and I mean deep, into an instant cult classic alien invasion thriller, written by one of the most original, crowd-pleasing popcorn cinema specialists working today, in my opinion. No One Will Save You by the fantastic Brynn Duffield was unlike anything I'd seen before, while simultaneously taking me back to this formative horror experience that I had as a kid. I remember one day coming across the poster to Alien by Ridley Scott in a magazine that I think my dad had left out or something, and I remember the tagline chilling me to the bone: "In space, no one can hear you scream." It's one of the all-time great movie taglines. 8 words so effective that the movie poster didn't need a picture of a snarling xenomorph on it. That sentence alone got the job done. That poster simultaneously made me so desperate to see the film and also frightened the hell out of me. And though I didn't know it at the time, I think what really got under my skin was how those 8 words implied this kind of isolation. The only thing more terrifying than the idea of some great being from outer space hunting you is the idea of doing it alone. The promise that no one can hear your cries for help, and therefore, sorry pal, you're on your own. And I bring this up because ever since I saw that poster as a kid that day, extraterrestrial terror and silence have been kind of entwined in my imagination. Which is maybe why I fell so hard for No One Will Save You when it was released last year. The film was almost entirely without dialogue. Its tale of a young woman named Brynn, whose solitary life is interrupted by an alien invasion, playing out pretty much wordlessly. It was as thrilling as it was inventive, as we've come to expect now from Brynn, a spec script maestro whose films are homages to the popcorn thrill rides that he grew up on, without being nostalgic replays of those 90s classics. As a writer, you might know him from having penned Insurgent from the Divergent series, Jane Got a Gun, Love and Monsters, Underwater, and the Netflix show Skull Island. And as a writer-director, his past credits include Spontaneous, a brilliant coming-of-age romcom set in a high school in which students are spontaneously combusting. I had the pleasure of sitting down with Brynn for an extensive talk about what this film represented to him. We get into the idea of this story being about alienation in more ways than one, and about what exactly is happening as the film reaches its enigmatic conclusion, an ending that had the internet rife with theories, as Brynn's fight to survive takes on a dreamy, seemingly utopian turn at its close. I should mention also that this conversation took place the week that it was announced that Universal were launching a new series of Jurassic Park movies, sparking a tweet from past Script Apart guest Liz Hannah, who felt very strongly that Brynn should be in the running to take on that franchise. We use that as a great jumping off point for what Brynn wants to do in the future as a writer-director, where his priorities lie. Thanks so much to Brynn for being such a great guest. He's someone I've been hoping to get on the show since the very beginning, so it's great we were able to finally make this happen. A huge thank you also to our Patreon supporters, without whom this show would not be possible. If you like what we do on Script Apart and want to support the show, you can join that community today for the price of a single monthly cup of coffee. In return, you'll get ad-free episodes, early access to episodes, and the chance to ask your questions to upcoming guests. That address one more time in case you're interested, it's patreon.com/scriptapart. Okay, this is a very long episode, perhaps even our longest, so I should wrap up this intro and get straight into it. This is the incredibly talented Brynn Duffield discussing the first draft secrets of No One Will Save You. Thanks so much everyone for tuning in. You're listening to Script Apart, hosted by me, Al Horner, produced by Camille Domecq. So let me ask you a dumb question to begin, Brynn. In an actual kind of, alien invasion, extraterrestrial threat situation, how do you think you'd get on? Because it struck me while prepping this conversation and revisiting the film that I would be, and I cannot stress this enough, so screwed. I do not have Brynn's resilience, her kind of Home Alone style ingenuity in defending her place. Like, I do not have that in my locker.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I'm a dad, and I think the answer before I was a dad would have probably been I would just roll over and die. And then now it's like we've had a couple earthquakes like in the middle of the night in Los Angeles, and I'm the opposite of the force majeure dad, or I'm like up and in the kid's room in like 2 seconds, and I'm like just like a crazed demon for the kids. So I probably would beat the shit out of the alien um if the kids were home. If the kids were not home, I'd probably just go back to bed and die.
Yeah, I would definitely be on the side of having like an alien slug looking like parasite down my throat in about 5 seconds. All the aliens would be talking about it for days, how comically ill equipped I was to deal with that situation. But
I think there is something about the fact that we would be so easy to conquer. And like I just think there's definitely like a sense of like it's so much work to like fight back.
yeah,
In
yeah.
in a sense of like it took them light years to get here. It's just like, you can put up a little bit of a fight, but like let's be real. Like it's not gonna last long.
I mean, it's so true. Like in the kind of quintessential alien invasion story, War of the Worlds, like our survival is entirely predicated in that story on some alien dude having not done his homework, having not thought to check out if these people on Earth have any flu-like viruses that they might be susceptible to.
Yeah, the aliens are anti-vaxxers. And it's their downfall. Yeah.
It's been about 6 months now, Brian, since No One Will Save You came out.
Oh wow.
Yeah. From the outside, it seemed to be your biggest project to date. Like, just in terms of how many people were discovering the film, spreading word of mouth about the film, dubbing Madonna's Vogue over footage of the Daddy Longlegs alien on TikTok, of course, that as well.
Yeah.
Now that the dust has settled on the film, how are you looking back on it? Like, it obviously kind of pushed your career to new places. It pushed your craft as a writer and a director to new places, clearly. What does the film mean to you now that you've got a bit of distance from it?
I think I'm really proud of it. Like the release was really rough because of the SAG strike. And so not having Caitlin be a part of the release felt really like hollow, I guess, in a way. Like it just felt very again, I don't think I was doing anything like in a weird way. I felt like it was almost like a betrayal to the movie to have it come out without Caitlin, who is the movie, and it's so wonderful kind of be a part of it. So there was a part of that where that was really sad. And Caitlin I know was really sad about it, but SAG needed to get a better deal. Um, and so that was like kind of like this weird cloud over it. And then it was funny, like I leading up to the release, I had no idea what people would think of it because like even when we tested it, it was so disastrous, but there was no aliens in the test. And so there was this part where it was just like, did I make a bad movie or are people just not understanding what they're looking at because Caitlin's running away from, in some cases, literal JPEGs. Um, and so it was like this very strange uh anxiety ridden thing where I knew the studio really loved the movie. Um, but it was I don't know. It was literally like okay, once review, and I don't even read the reviews, but it quickly became apparent like it was positive, which was a nice relief. Because I always assume everything I do is going to end my career, uh, and then when it started taking off, because I mean, I think the upside of streaming is sometimes they take risks on movies like this that I don't think would have gotten like a theatrical release, or at least it wouldn't have been the same movie if in a theatrical situation. And then the downside is sometimes those movies vanish within 15 minutes. And so the fact that we were kind of kicking around for what felt like a while was really really nice and surprising. And yeah, it was a trip that people went on the weirdo journey with us. But so that was a long answer, but it was a very, I guess I haven't thought about the debrief of the release since it came out. I did so much, because Caitlin couldn't do anything. I did so much press, and it
Yeah.
was awful.
There was something, I suppose, quite fitting about like Caitlin hadn't spoken throughout this
I
dialogueless film, you know.
know.
Um,
Yeah, she still has not done any press, which is so funny too. Um, and we haven't done any like screenings or anything together. So I think the hope is at some point in the fall there might be something. But it does feel like this weird unresolved uh uh thing that it's just like, oh yeah, like, and I think the proudest thing I am of the movie, and I can barely take credit for it, is all of the feedback about how spectacular she is in it. And so yeah, just wanting to have a victory lap for her would be really nice. But it was a weird time to release uh a movie with one person who can't promote it.
yeah, I can imagine. You strike me, Brian, as being someone very attuned to where in your life a story of yours might be emanating from. So, Love and Monsters, which was a film that came out in 2020 based on a spec that you wrote called Monster Problems way back in the early 2010s.
Yeah.
That script was inspired by your experiences in the dating world, like the loneliness of being single.
Yeah, and then they changed it.
Well, yeah, which is a whole other conversation to get into.
I'm gonna get in trouble. But anyway.
Now that you have some distance from No One Will Save You, though,
Yeah.
have you come to any realizations about what made you gravitate towards the themes of this film? Like, I know, for example, that you have some experience of the isolation that Brynn experiences in the film, having moved to Ireland at an early age with your family.
Mm-hmm.
So I know that you've had a taste of that feeling of being on the fringe of a community, looking in, hopefully nothing like the experience Brynn has in this film. Is there anything like from a personal standpoint like that you've come to realize you were kind of carrying with you or working through while writing this film?
Yeah, it's kind of a smorgasbord, I guess, in a lot of ways. I remember, because I've talked about it before, like it was kind of two different ideas that kind of got married. And one of them was the alien idea. And then the other was the Brynn character idea. And I remember, I think before my daughter, who's our oldest, was born, there was like that rush of Slender Man documentaries.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and which was, the girls attacked one of their friends at a very young age. And then the documentaries followed like their families, visiting the girls in juvie and stuff like that. And then one of my favorite movies was always Heavenly Creatures. And being really interested in the fact that those girls, did this horrible thing, but when they were, again, so young. And then went off and lived and built lives and had to kind of build lives around a new personas in some cases. And then I don't know, something about that just really stuck with me about, what happens if these terrible things happen at such a young age. Like, how do you kind of keep going? And so that would, and then I think the idea, like the fact that I was getting ready to have kids of my own, like that was, I don't know, it was just in my head a lot at the time. And I remember really trying to like figure that story out, and then just kind of being like, it seems so miserable to just do like the indie version of that. And also just didn't feel like there was anything to like say about it in the context of a like character study, like in a straight character study, I guess. Other than like how do you carry on? How do you figure, like, it just felt like you'd have to get like therapy scenes and, stuff that again just felt like a movie I would probably love to watch. Like I loved Mass a few years ago.
Yeah, yeah.
Loved Mass. Not a movie I could write or direct. So there's something about it where it says it's like this is a character I really want to play with, but I'm not equipped to tell that kind of story. And then when they got married, the two ideas, it kind for some reason the cocktail really worked in my brain. Um, in ways I'm still not entirely sure why. But I also just have given up trying to understand why when I have those ideas. I'm like, let's just see what happens, and hopefully someone connects with it.
Well, it's so funny that you'd describe it that way because, well, I mentioned monster problems a moment ago. You described in an interview once about your process on that film, on that script rather, beginning with a character whose romantic life is all over the shop, and then putting him in a world where there were these giant monsters, which gave him this ability to have these really physical obstacles to overcome instead of just overcoming things inwardly. That same description really does apply to No One Will Save You a decade on. Yeah, this isn't a story about aliens, really. It's kind of more about a girl whose brush with aliens allows her to process something that's been blocked in her. That's a really interesting distinction. Like, why is it that makes for a better movie, Brian? You've written a couple of these now, so
Yeah.
what's your take on why it is that's more satisfying?
I feel like the answer is so stupid. It's probably because I like aliens and monsters. But I don't know. There's also the more psychoanalytical answer, I think, is that I think what genre does so well is it makes really human and personal problems. It gives them a different voice, I guess, that kind of makes them taste a little, it makes the medicine taste a little better going down. Um, but also I think that's kind of one of the fun things about writing and writing to theme too, is that idea of, okay, I can do the version of Brynn is an outcast and she's going to a therapist and she's online dating but never meeting, all that kind of stuff. But then is there a movie version of that where I can talk about all the same things, but in a way that is using genre to kind of dig into this character in a way that maybe the straight version would the subtext of it would be a little bit more, I guess for me, just flat and boring.
Yeah.
And so, but like I wish there was like a really cool answer I could give, but I think it's also just growing up with great genre movies that were about something real and how they use genre to talk about it, and that just being such a chemically altered thing in my bloodstream at this point that's kind of the same key I sing in, I guess.
Well, one thing that is so fascinating about like the way those two stories then fit together is these particular monsters, like they're the perfect obstacle for Brynn to overcome. She is someone who, for lack of a better word, is alienated. No One Will Save You takes that alienation and kind of makes it literal.
Yeah.
That kind of reminded me of what you did with Spontaneous, where you're taking this very real life emotion and you're kind of cranking that emotion to some new extreme that then pushes it into the world of genre.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, probably in my shame, there was a little bit of like the pun of being alienated made me think of aliens.
Yeah.
But hopefully not. But there's probably some truth to it. But I think, yeah, I think like Spontaneous too, like there's a version of that story that's Elephant. Great, great movie of a similar idea and a similar theme. Um, that again, like it's just I don't think that's a movie I'm equipped to make, or at least maybe not at this point in my life. Um, uh, but the weird the weird Cronenberg rom-com version of it is something weirdly I understand and fluent in. But it's the same, kind of getting to work out the same characters and the same problems. I think it's just the instrument I use is different, and I think that's also what genre has always been so wonderful at doing. And so and there's also like honestly there's like that's the sincere stuff, and there's also the stuff where I like blowing up cars. Like there's like I like making like there's something so fun about getting to play with all the toys, and having endless meetings about blood splatter and all of those different things, but then also having hours and hours of conversation with your actors about very personal things. Looks like it kind of I don't know. Right now I'm really loving making movies. And I think there's also just a part of it where it's just like, yeah, I could go do like the 20-day drama and hopefully it wouldn't be bad. But there's also a part of me that just wants to have aliens bopping around and all that fun stuff. So I'm sure I will do dramas and stuff in the future if people let me. But I don't know, right now I was just when the studio's like, we'll make this alien movie, I'm just kind of like, great. Like I don't need to think more about it than that in some ways. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's been funny, like there's then it comes out and people start telling you what they think it means to your own personal backstory, and then that's always illuminating and weird. So everyone becomes my therapist. Yeah.
It's all right. I'm not billing you, so we're fine. It is an incredible film. Terrible, memorable quotes section on IMDb, though, Brian.
Yeah, I bet.
We should mention that this is a movie that famously features little to no dialogue. That's no gimmick, though. It really does feel thematically justified. Like, anyone who's experienced a version of the sort of isolation that Brynn is living through at the start of this movie, they can tell you really can go through what feels like days, weeks at a time without speaking to another human. And this movie kind of heightens that to a point where the silence is deafening. How early on did you know that that was something you wanted to lean into, something that would mark it apart from other alien invasion movies? And of course, the other question, I suppose, is, did it terrify you as someone who does write great dialogue, evidenced by your other films? All of a sudden, you were kind of taking that tool out of your toolbox. Was that as daunting as I expect it would be?
No, the answer is also very stupid. Which was that I think I was like halfway through the script until I realized there was no dialogue. And then I was kind of like, oh, well, I can see this out. But again, not the no dialogue thing specifically, but it was like after spontaneous, I knew I wanted, and when I started working on this, I knew it was going to be really lean and mean, and that she was going to be alone. And so there wasn't going to be a lot of quips or banter. And I knew really early on, I was like, I don't want her to have a therapist. I there was, and we shot like a little bit of it, like some online chatting she would have with people, and we cut that out pretty early on in filming. And but like beyond that, like it was really like once Brynn went to get help, and like I knew really early on what would happen to her in that scene, and then once you kind of get out of that scene, you're like, well, no one's spoken still, and narratively there's not many places this movie could go that would require speaking. Or if there was, it's just like, and I always knew the dialogue in the movie was like that was always part of the conceit of it. So it was always, I always feel like it's like a little bit of a lie. It's like when people call Birdman like one take, and then there's like a montage at the end of it. Like it's not really one take. And like same with this, like people call it like silent. It's like it's not really. There's just she's just not talkative. Um, and then the joke is that the aliens never shut up. They just talk like the whole time. So I had endless dialogue meetings about the aliens. And so I think there was like not really a part of the process that felt daunting in that way because there wasn't like a cat for her to talk to, or like there wasn't that. And then the trick kind of just became about like conveying information to the audience, so that they wouldn't be confused, because and that was really illuminating. Like there would just be things, because it's kind of a complicated movie for not having dialogue, and so there would be things that an audience would grab onto because they weren't being told not to. And their minds would just go off into this whole other direction. And so when we were screening it for friends or testing, like we ran into that problem a bunch. And then that was
Have you got an example, Brian?
yeah. Oh, a big one was that Brynn had an affair with the police officer. Um, for whatever reason, that was always like the first couple rounds, like that was all it was always like, because people weren't connecting the police officers with Maud. And so that was something we shot like the little glimpse of Maud's parents at the start of the movie earlier. And then we just kept revising the letter writing so that it would be so blunt. So there was that. And then I remember one screening, and I don't even like, it's one of those things that's so weird because it's not something that can happen. But a bunch of people thought that Brynn had stolen the police officer and his wife's house, and that the house she lived in was their house, and that's why they were mad. And like I remember, I think it was like one of the first tests, and there was like 4 or 5 people that said the same thing, and you can't tell if they were like sitting together or what, but you're just kind of like, I don't know how to do that. And then we also had the problem in I think it was our first test that we had a bunch, like, because they make you go like, what's your favorite scene, what's your least favorite scene, and there's like 10 or 15 people that put down a least favorite scene that was all unanimous amongst them, but it wasn't in the movie. And it was, I can't remember like what it was right now, but it was like one of those things where like I remember being with my editor Gabe and being like, the scene's a problem, but it's also doesn't exist, and I don't know how to address the note that there's this collective thing of people um going down this path. And I guess what we found out pretty quickly was that when people weren't given dialogue, um and and like you're hoping that they're paying attention to the screen, but like maybe they're not, maybe they're drifting away or whispering to somebody, and without having that radio show kind of informing them what was going on, there were just a bunch of lapses in figuring out what was going on. And then they would find something and latch onto it and kind of go down that path, and then be confused when the movie was not supporting what they thought the story was. So that was really interesting to kind of see how much. And again, I don't want to say it's because people were casually watching, but I think there is an element of when people are confused that they are casually watching. And then if I think you're so attuned now to like watching Netflix and having your phone in your hand, but you're getting like the updates about what's going on screen, which I know something Netflix really, and probably most places try to do intentionally. So that was like a very interesting thing. So long way around, it was like the actual shooting of it and the Caitlin having no dialogue. That was all very. It felt like a normal movie in every way. And then it was funny where it was like some of the early assumptions or confusions like really having to nail that down. I think part of it too was that opening 8 minutes or so. It was like, how short can that be before the aliens show up? But then the aliens show up and you kind of take a break from what you learned in that first 8 minutes about the character. And then as Brynn goes off into town and everything, you kind of have to quickly be reminded again of, hey, remember 30 minutes ago after this long ass set piece? And so that was an interesting thing to try to figure out in a filmic way what you can do that make people go, I'm going to remember this, even if I don't know I need to remember this yet. So that when I get to the second act and I get to the third act, I'm remembering things visually. And sometimes it would literally just be like really, really dorky close-ups of name tags and letter write and just things where you were just like, we are being so long on this close-up or so like in your face about some of this stuff that to me it would feel like way too much, like terrible exposition. But then we just found out through showing the movie to people, it was like you could have like the words cannot be big enough on the screen for people to not notice them. And what we thought was like really loud, heavy-handed exposition was still pretty subtle for a lot of people visually. And so that was just an interesting thing to learn. And it was also just funny because, you know, there wasn't a ton of comps that even audiences had to the movie. Like, it's not like The Artist, and it's not like All Is Lost, which are movies that I love too, because it's also a mystery in a lot of ways. And so it was just a very interesting post process to kind of figure out how to make people pay attention to certain things without being obnoxious about it. So I don't know if we did it, but that was the thing about the silent, like there's no problem in prep and there's no problem in shooting, and then not again, it wasn't really a problem in post, but it was just a very interesting thing when you could see like, oh, she's not talking within 3 minutes, and then people just go off into making their own movies, and then they get disappointed when you're not giving them the movie they thought they were watching. So I don't have an answer for that part. I guess it's a very interesting thing about it. Yeah.
It must have been an exciting opportunity as well, I suppose. Like in the absence of dialogue, there was more space on the page to fill out with other kind of sensory elements. Like I was really aware reading the screenplay that, like, you know, the volume of crickets outside Brynn's window, that becomes like a storytelling tool. There are all these different kind of light and sound storytelling devices in the film. Was that something new for you? Did you already have a great grip on that stuff, or did it push you into somewhere new in terms of writing?
I don't know if it was new. I mean, it's something that I think the thing about Spontaneous was there were so many conversations about what an exploding child would look like and what tone that exploding child would have to convey, and then what an exploding child would sound like, and also trying to figure out like, okay, how do you blow up a child in your first shot and not have people turn off the movie? And because it's already like, it was so hard, I remember, until the kind of the critical acclaim of that movie, it was so hard to get like execs or people to watch Spontaneous because they were so freaked out about what the movie they thought was in their head when they heard what it was about. And so I think having a lot of conversations about that with my crew, like, it made me really fall in love with that part of filmmaking, and really fall in love with sound design in a way that as a writer, you love great sound design, but until it's like the thing, like until you're the guy, and you can say what you think a sound should be, it's night and day. And so I think on No Will Save You, it was really fun to kind of be like, the sound design's going to be fucking sick and scary, um and how we shoot them. Like I knew Aaron Morton was going to be my guy again. And then it was just like, oh, well, how do I get Aaron to show off? And then how do I get production design to show off? And it's like, I think I'm really drunk in love with that process. That it's all to story, but it's also always thinking about like, okay, like I have like the best sound guys in the world. Like, how do they? I want them to be challenged because it's fun to fuck with them, and B, make a movie that's worth their time. Like they're getting nominated for the Batman and they're winning Emmys for Last of Us. Like if they're gonna do a movie, I want them to be like nerding out. And same with Aaron shot Rings of Power in the interim between Spontaneous and Nowsy, and is getting offered giant movies. And if it's going to be a movie that is worth his time, like I don't want it to just be, oh, because we're best buddies. Like I want it to be like, you have to show off. And I think it's part of that. It's like getting to tell the story about how Brynn is being terrorized is one level of it as a writer. And then as a filmmaker, it's kind of like wanting to make pedestals for all of my guys to flex and show off, because then that also makes Brynn's character in more peril, because the sound guys are doing crazy shit and Aaron's shooting a movie that's set at night that you can see everything and all these different elements. So I think so I think part of it was the script was like writing in all that sound stuff, because I knew I was going to hand it to these sound guys or share it with a production designer, and wanted to be like, look at all the fun we get to have on together doing this movie. And so I think it came out as Spontaneous and all of the panic about what a kid exploding would be like. But then that panic I really loved and I really enjoyed being the boss of, because I think a frustration I have with the scripts that I sold and didn't direct is I think I always get afraid I'm going to get in trouble, but tonally they are not what I want. And I'm a real tone bitch. And I think so much of that is craft, especially for genre movies like Spontaneous and Nowsy. And so I think my writing has probably evolved to a place where I'm really specific on the page, not just for a written story perspective, but also for the script's going to go to some of the best crew in the world. And I want them to know it's going to be a party. And that also is contributing. Like the sound is such a tone important thing to this movie. And I think, I've talked a lot about like testing the movie was a nightmare. And a big part of the nightmare was the sound was not there. And like the movie is such a different experience with the sound guys' work, that it also kind of feels, and like it's funny, like I think even just their sound work made a lot of the confusion go away in a really interesting way, because they're also able to focus the image and the storytelling in a very direct way that I think people don't think about with sound usually. And it's so yeah, I think it's there's a lot of like the footstep sounds, and there's a lot of whooshes and clang clang clangs and all that kind of stuff in the script. And it was really trying to be like, sound is such a character in the movie. And I also knew, and it did happen, I knew when we went out with the package that some bonehead exec was going to think a silent movie meant there was no sound at all. And it happened. And then they saw the movie and they were like, well, there's so many sounds. Like I thought it was going to be silent. And I was like, oh, great, you have a job in Hollywood. But so I was in on the page just trying to make it be as loud as possible to avoid people going, that's going to be like, people are going to be confused. It's so quiet. Like, why is there no music?
It is interesting. You mentioned how there wasn't really a direct comp for the movie. Like the kind of no dialogue aspect of it was something that pushed the genre forward into new areas. Like obviously kind of dialogue-less filmmaking, that's nothing new. But in the terms of like a blockbuster sci-fi spectacle, we haven't had anything like it. You're totally right. One element, though, that's kind of like classical in contrast to the sort of envelope pushing of the no dialogue stuff is the fact that as an alien movie, the aliens themselves, like it's quite a familiar archetype.
Yeah.
You went with the Greys, and you know these characters. They're this kind of type of alien is kind of like the predominant way that we've imagined aliens, like as a collective in the stories that we tell about them.
Yeah.
Like Close Encounters had them, American Dad has one, like everything in between.
Yeah.
Why the Greys, Brian? Talk me through that decision.
There's again, very dumb answer, which is that I love them. And that I've been frustrated that there hasn't been a really great horror movie that uses them. Um, I think partially it's the price point, and so like Carrie's Dark Skies, is that Carrie Russell's alien movie? But they have like one shot of the aliens at the end, and they're grayish in silhouette, and it's really scary. But you're like, that movie's like a $5 million movie, and I knew this movie was going to be. They show up 5 minutes in, and so there's just a part of me that was like, if I'm going to have floor to ceiling aliens, I kind of want to have the aliens that I'm frustrated that I don't see on screen anymore, because everyone's trying to be new and bold in such a way that it's like if you've made 30 years of dinosaur movies but you haven't used a T-Rex, I'm kind of like, just give me the big guy. And so there's that element, and then secondly, because there was no dialogue, I thought when Brynn and the audience first see an alien, I needed it to be so clearly in your mind that it was an alien, and it wasn't a man, it wasn't a vampire, it wasn't like, I think if it looked like a District 9 alien, I think people would have been really confused for a long time. They would have been like, did it come out of her lake? Did it come out of that? Like, I think I was like, make it as clean and clear as possible. 5 minutes in, there's an alien in her house, and it like no one second guesses it's an alien. Like everyone goes alien. And then you can have fun with that design because everyone, has the alien keychain. They know the Roswell, and then you can start having fun with what you as an audience know about the alien. You instantly stamp onto what Brynn knows about an alien. And then you can do like the toe gag, and you're like, oh shit, that's new. Or it talks, and like, that's new. And so you can kind of start subverting that expectation. And then the third thing that people kind of started glomming onto this is for Brynn as a character, and this is so nerdy, I'm sorry, but Brynn as a character I knew had a very misdeveloped adolescence, and there's a part of Brynn that, partially because of how her mom was, but also because she didn't have an adolescence, something Caitlin and I talked about a lot was that she is kind of pretending to be what she thinks an adult is. And so part of that is that whole kind of 50s aesthetic. Like there's a part of her that didn't really have a life from like 10 to like 22. And so she kind of leaves purgatory as an adult woman. And there's a part of her that's like, I'm going to live and die in this house, that were my parents' house. But I have to be an adult, and I have to make the best of my life. But what does being an adult look like? Because I have no one around me to illustrate that. And that by the things we talked about, it kind of became this 50s aesthetic about like, what would that adult be? And like, I think part of that is just her taste. And then part of it is this real, in my head, this is what being an adult looks like. And then we talked about Far From Heaven a lot. And that kind of how Todd Haynes used the Cirque melodrama to kind of talk about very modern issues, and issues that were modern then too, but just what he does with genre is so incredible, and I'm jealous. And then it just kind of became like, well, if we're kind of living in this weird 50s bubble, it's kind of fun if you just commit all the way, and the aliens are also part of that aesthetic. So, and again, and it kind of, I'm sure we'll talk about the end at some point, but it kind of ties into this idea where, Brynn's aesthetic is so counter to the rest of the world, but the aliens aesthetic is kind of closer to what her aesthetic is than to what the rest of the world would expect or anticipate. Um, and so there's just something I thought that was really, really fun with that thread. Which again, that's very, very director subtextual, I guess. But I think for me, there was fun to be had with, like, if aliens showed up in Far From Heaven, they would look like these guys. Um, and so why not have the aliens that come into Brynn's weird 50s bubble be from that weird Roswell inspired generation? And but I also, selfishly, I just wanted Grays. So there's, sometimes I can preach good bullshit, but like sometimes I'm just like, I just where's my Grays?
That is fascinating, though, what you alluded to there in terms of Brynn's character and that misdeveloped adolescence that's helped define her. Can I just invite you to tell me a bit more about that and how you mapped that out, the life that she didn't have from 10 to 22?
Well, I mean, I think like the big event and is, it's spoilery, but that, she inadvertently killed her friend, and did so at like 9 or 10, um and that just had a massive, as you would expect, fallout and change in her life. And then she went to like a juvenile hall, and while she was there, her mother passed, which is such a bummer. And again, trying not to make it too sad. And then, she comes out of it, because I think the thing that was interesting about the character to me is that she's not a evil person, but she did an evil thing, even by accident. And there's not really a point in the movie, or I think in Caitlin at all, that would suggest that she doesn't think she deserves to be treated like she is treated by the town. And I think that is a really interesting place to have a character that doesn't, like, there's not a woe is me quality to her. There's not like a fight back to that. Like, she's fighting back to a lot of things, but not to how people treat her. And then I think it's like she's built this fake bubble for herself because she does, and it's not even as a defense mechanism. Like, she just doesn't know what else to do because she's so young and does not have a life. And we have like backstory, and some of it we cut just because it was boring. But then it was just like, the house is paid off, and like, she could sell it, but that's the last thing of her mom. It's like all these different like character things where you're like, it's this beautiful home. She could move, but like someone would just go, they would on a date find out, oh, it would, like, that's what happened to the Heavenly Creatures girls. Like, people, as soon as the internet, and not, I think even before the internet, but like people quickly found out as the world got smaller who they were. And so there's no real life for Brynn to like change her name to Mary and move to Phoenix. And like at some point someone's gonna go, oh, this is who she is. And she knows that. And so it just felt like building up this character that had this bubble because she just doesn't think her life is going to get bigger than this bubble, doesn't think her life deserves to get bigger than this bubble. And then you have aliens destroy this bubble. And it kind of really forces her to get into some pretty yucky weeds about who she is, her thoughts about herself, and then ultimately her thoughts about the world and what world she does belong in. And so, yeah, that all felt like the really fun character stuff that, again, like, if it wasn't a genre movie, I don't know how I would have gotten to talk about any of that stuff, really. But because it's a genre movie, you can have scenes where she is engaging with herself or her dead best friend who's a teenager now, or all these different things. Like it's a very the genre allows, the kind of uncovering of this character in a way that otherwise I think would be a lot of conversations just between Caitlin and myself. But instead you can kind of put on screen and get to do fun things, and also fun things specifically for this movie. Like there's not really another movie that I can do that you can do these things. And so it also felt very unique in that regard, where you could play with a lot of these things only because it was a genre movie, and only because it was an alien movie, and only because it was the story in an alien movie, which was nice too.
You mentioned there how the way that she's been ostracized hasn't resulted in kind of bitterness. There's something like really willing in her to kind of earn people's affection back. And it's fascinating. Like I read obviously the first draft that you kindly sent over, Brian, and it's remarkably similar.
I haven't read it since I wrote it, so.
Well, yeah, like it's remarkably similar, the kind of spine of the film. But
yeah,
there are ways in which you've really lent into the character's heartbreak. In the first draft, you kind of open with a variation on a scene in the film. We have Brynn awaiting a package from a mailman. She hides from the mailman, which kind of begs the question, why is she doing that? And then the mailman kind of dumps the package for her unceremoniously, as you put it. And again, like it sort of spikes your intrigue, like what's up with this guy's disdain for Brynn that he takes such little care with what he's delivering. That then turns out to be like a little model of a village building, and that's an important...
Oh, back when it was the Lamax villages.
That's right, yeah. So that sort of changed slightly.
That's like my one pet. I have many pet peeves, but do you know what those villages are?
I had to Google them because it's a Halloween village building. That it's not something that exists over here.
Yeah, and then they wouldn't grant us the opportunity to use them for the movie because it was going to be used as a murder weapon. And I was just like, you guys, it's murdering an alien. Like this is like your whole brand. Like this is the cool, like this is, you would sell so much of this. It'd be so cool. And it's like, I love what Ramsey Avery came up with, our production designer, but it was also like this, and it kind of made sense because we knew we weren't going to be able to shoot in the fall. So the Halloween of the movie went away. But I was also just like, guys, this is for a horror brand to not want an alien to be killed using your stuff. I was like, someone mistranslated something along the way, because that's like a vampire steak company not wanting a steak to be used to kill a vampire in a movie. It's like, guys, come on.
But like what you ended up with though, like it's such an important like visual motif in the movie, so much so that in the finished film, you actually begin with this overhead shot of Brynn's house that from that vantage point makes it kind of look like a doll's house. I guess before we get into Brynn's character and some of the kind of ways in which you were leaning into the heartbreak, as I say, talk me through that motif, because it seems to be saying so much about Brynn, who she is, like the fact that she's seemingly quite interested in in building these idyllic miniature worlds while inhabiting a world that is anything but idyllic towards her. Like her world contains so much pain.
Yeah, I think, and this is partially why being a writer director is so much better than being a writer. And excuse me, I think it partially began as knowing that Brynn had to have something to work on that the aliens would destroy. That meant a lot to her. And you don't want it to do like, most family mementos don't really like have the same weight as maybe they did in a pre-digital era. Like, destroying a photo of your mom, now there's photos online, so it's like, okay, there has to be something physical that she can have and that you can see that she is delighted in doing, for no other reason that she delights in doing it. And then I was like, oh, the Lamax buildings would be cool because, like, you get a new one every year, and so you could ideally it's like 35 years worth of Lamax village. Her mom started, now she's taken over, and now it's been destroyed. And then we had the thing with Lamax happen very early on, and then Ramsey, our production designer, got involved, and we were talking about it, and he brought up the birdhouse element because he had seen these things on Etsy that were similar, but then he had also been talking a lot about the idea of like, a birdhouse and a bird cage aren't really that different when you think about it. And same thing with the house. Like, it's not a prison, but it is kind of a prison. Like, she can make it nice and she can make it her nest, but it's, so Ramsey goes off and he kind of comes up with all these thematic things, and then he brings them to me, and I get really excited because I'm like, that is thematically really interesting and juicy. And then it kind of starts permeating the movie in a way that thematically suits where the movie is going so much better than my shitty first idea. But is something that I only would have come to because I have great people working on the movie. And so and then everything you do gets to lean into that idea of, she's building her own world, aliens are building their own world. Like, it just kind of starts feeding everywhere. And so before you get to day one, Lamax saying no has resulted in 10,000 changes that happened because we're so excited because of Ramsey Avery having a great idea. It has nothing to do with me other than having the good sense to hire Ramsey Avery. And so there's something about that process that I just really love. And so it's like, to some extent, like, yeah, it's like the rewrite is trying to become a better and more complete movie. But I think I love changing the script. I'm not precious about the scripts I direct at all, and I love changing them because people have better ideas and then they credit me with them. So I think, but it's part of the exciting part of being a writer director, because when I was just a writer, you would just see people fucking up all the time. And it was so hard to witness, whether I was present or long fired. And or seeing people get excited about the wrong things, as opposed to, and that's not denigrating any of the crew or even the directors of those things. It was just, I feel like directing, and I've said this to other writers, I feel like directing is just finishing the sentence that you start writing.
Yeah.
Where it does feel like it's kind of like writing a script and then suddenly it feels like playing a game of telephone. And like by the time it gets back to you, you're like, I didn't say anything like that. But no one is necessarily, like, I've had people sin, but like in general, no one's necessarily sinning in a game of telephone. But as a writer director, you say a sentence, and I think what's great is then you have a lot of really talented people helping make that sentence better. And so I think that it's kind of a weird way to answer your question, but I think so much of it is the writing of the script became a lot of ways the directing of the script, because once I had department heads involved, it just becomes such a fuller movie. And once I have Caitlin involved, it becomes such a fuller movie. And then I just write the script to, again, I think, show off my crew. But my crew is showing off Brynn. And so it's like this really lovely relationship I think you can have as a filmmaker, that you're, as a writer director specifically, where your script evolves, if you let it, to suit your department heads and your actors. And then, like you said, it would like start off with like Lamax Halloween building set at Halloween because I like spooky things. And I like that she was building a world, and then that idea becomes so much more fully developed and fleshed out because of other people, not necessarily because I'm smart.
So was it Caitlin then that helped you arrive at some of the tweaks that you did end up making to the opening 8 minutes? And I ask because, well, one thing that's not in the original draft is this beautiful shot of Brynn practicing her smile in a mirror and practicing waving to people in the mirror. That's our introduction to the character in the finished film, and well, there's something really heartbreaking about it to me. We don't know why yet, but clearly this is someone who, I guess, really wants people's love, really wants their affection, and is trying to win back some kind of civility from neighbors. From there, in the finished film, we get these little glimpses at the plot to come. Again, lots of these things aren't in the first draft. Brynn goes out for a drive. She hides from an elderly couple. We don't know at that point who the couple are. Were you observing the strengths of your lead actress and writing to kind of lean into her talents? Or, yeah, how did those opening 8 minutes come to change a little bit from script to screen?
The 8 minutes was probably the hardest part of the movie to figure out because of you have to set up everything in those 8 minutes. She can't engage with everybody. You have to understand that she's lonely, but ideally not really understand that she's not talking. And then you also have to establish basically all of the rules for the aliens without letting on that there's aliens. And also, and I think definitely Caitlin, but I think the studio at Steve Asbell and JR at 20th were a big part of this, and in a very positive way. I have to say, like, it was a really great experience with them. But like so much of it was like, okay, we're going to be on Hulu. And if you get bored within 30 seconds, you can turn it off. And knowing that we were kind of, in a way, going to be a boring movie for 8 minutes, but you don't know that when you hit play. You don't know that instead of 70 minutes in, when an alien usually shows up, you have to wait 7 minutes. But we're going to act like we're a different movie for 7 minutes. And so part of it was trying to figure out, okay, like, how do we buy enough interest in and knowing the movie's probably going to get marketed as a horror movie. The image on Hulu will be horror related, but like, how do you keep people watching a girl go about her day in a way that is designed to be kind of routine and boring? And then once the lights go out, you're like, okay, I'm in. I get what they were doing, but you have to earn that somehow without, you can't, it's not like you can stand up in front of the movie and be like, give me 7 minutes and I'll make it worth your while. You'll get an alien. So then it became, okay, well, how interesting can Brynn be as a character that you keep watching? 99% of that is that you cast Caitlin Dever, who's just the most lovable character on screen. And then it instantly becomes confusing. Like, why don't you like Caitlin Dever? And like, why don't characters in the movie like Caitlin Dever? Like, that becomes something worth leaning into, because you're like, how could anyone not like Caitlin Dever? So that becomes something we start leaning into. And then the two examples you mentioned were two pickups, and for like two really specific reasons. The first was that people forgot about Maud so completely by the time we got to the police station, that there was just no part of people's brains that were like making the connection between those parents and this Maud person. And so it just became like, people need to see these parents earlier on in the movie so that we can go from seeing them to Brynn writing, "Dear Maud, I saw your parents today." Like, it's so blunt, but you're like, okay, the cop is Maud's dad. And then you're kind of fine, you're fine. And then the neighbor one was really interesting. And it was, and that actor, we had shot the dance with him, and he was great at the end. But that was his only scene. And then showed the studio the movie, showed, I think, some friends the movie, and showed the test audience the movie. And kind of going back to your other question earlier, the majority of people thought the invasion was happening solely to Brynn, to such an extent that a lot of people thought the whole movie was some weird psycho trip in Brynn's head. Like, because there was nothing about, there's nothing but the bus scene, and then UFOs in the sky, but the UFOs are in the sky above Brynn's. and then the ending is so whatever it is, that people were still like, the people were just like, okay, there's why are the aliens picking on Brynn? And then we were getting into the weeds of like, did the aliens make Brynn kill Maud? Like it was just kind of like this mess. And so like kind of the big note out of that, and like knowing we were going to do some pickups, and also part of it too, we had weather shutdowns in New Orleans, and so when that happens, you can't shoot. And in 20th for Grant, they gave me a little bit more time, but there were like some things we just had to lose, and some of it was glimpses of extraterrestrial shit going on around town, which there's probably a little bit of that in the first draft, and I think in the shooting draft there was, and it was just the stuff where it was just like, that's exteriors, and we lost the chance to shoot it, but maybe we don't need it. And then it turned out, and people liked the movie, that they just thought the aliens were picking on Brynn, but I think we all kind of collectively wanted it to be like, no, it's like War of the Worlds, but we're just locked in a house. And so but again, not a big budget movie. And so then I was like, okay, what's the most economical way that we can tell some of this without being War of the Worlds? Or and so then it became, okay, she has, and originally I think it was an old woman who was her neighbor that didn't like her. And then it was, she doesn't like her, and we can add a scene where the mail truck's destroyed and this house is busted up, and we see crop circles, and we're like, okay, aliens at the neighbors, he wasn't so lucky. And then when Brynn comes home, see a little bit more alien bullshit. And then at the end, you're like, oh, I know this guy. And we had that little bit of that house at the end was a pickup too, just to kind of tell this War of the Worlds story in a way. So that was the majority of our reshoot, was adding that element to just kind of be like, it's worldwide. But again, and that was kind of like setting up the rules of the alien, so that when Brynn leaves the house, you're kind of like, I know she has a neighbor. What happened to the neighbor? Oh, he wasn't so lucky. So like kind of instantly 30 minutes in, you're like, okay, this town is besieged, even if not everyone realizes it yet. And then something happened to the mailman. And then, oh, there's the mailman. Oh, and then this is a new element, that something happened here. And so it just kind of helped audiences put the pieces together in a way that, yeah, and a lot of people liked the movie when they thought it was just aliens picking on Brynn. But then it just had a lot of people being like, why do they care about her so much? As opposed to they're wiping everyone out, and then this girl is just giving them a hard time.
There's one tiny detail that I remember really made me lean in the first time I saw the movie. Brynn has this almost musical sequence where, you know, she's dancing around her flat, and there's like a brief moment where the phone goes, she picks it up, and I mean, I think you can hear an F-bomb. Like there's a little burst of violence, and she puts the phone down straight away, unbothered.
Which the ratings board didn't catch.
Well, that's just as well. But yeah, it's
we were very proud. That's my editor, who is the voice too, and we were like, we don't want to get an R rating, and we knew we were like towing the line, and then they didn't catch the F-bomb, and then the studio never caught the F-bomb, and then I told them, and they were like, where? And they were like excited that I had hidden one. I was like, there's not that many places for it. So
what's so great about it is like the way that she puts the phone down immediately. It's just one of those tiny little inflections where you realize, okay, she gets the...
That's a good Caitlin detail, yeah.
Yeah, she gets these a lot, and immediately there's something so jarring about like how idyllic the world that she has created within this hermetic seal is for herself, versus like something's, busting to get in that's quite violent and angry. I love that. I love the kind of... I love what happens when we actually get to the invasion, which happens a lot sooner than we're used to in these types of movies. If you go read Close Encounters, if you go read, I don't know, like any of them, A Quiet Place, I suppose.
Yeah. Signs was the big tipping point for me on this one. Yeah.
Yeah, but in those films, I guess they probably abide to conventional screenwriting logic of like the aliens turning up is page 30, it's the inciting incident. But instead, as we've kind of been alluding to, it's 8 minutes into the movie that we get our first glimpse, and it's also this kind of like almost real time 10-minute sequence. It teases in each part of the alien anatomy, if you like, but everything there is to be revealed about the kind of the greys, or at least the first grey that we meet, we see up front in a really immediate way. And we get to know these aliens' personalities in a way that's quite upfront. You describe in the screenplay one of the aliens kind of testing out Brynn's bed. Another you describe as fucking with her. Like, these guys aren't animalistic like a lot of the aliens you do encounter. They're incredibly smart. And part of that intelligence is there's kind of curiosity on their part. Like, we are weird little animals to them that they want to play with. All of these details make me wonder, like, what your understanding of their motivations were. It feels like they maybe think they're doing something benevolent here. Maybe they think they're evolving us in some way. There's something different to the typical invasion movie template going on.
Part of my frustration with a lot of sci-fi alien movies is at no point do I connect the aliens with the ships they came in on. Like, there's something that feels like they're monsters, but then they have starcrafts that, the ability to get to Earth is so far beyond what we are capable of. And so really important to me that, the aliens have to be scary monsters, but have to have a brain of sorts where you're kind of like, I get it. Like, I get how these assholes got here. Without them being wolves. Because I think a lot of alien movies, they kind of are versions of wolves where you're like, a wolf in my house is terrible. Don't think a wolf could drive a car. So there's that. And then I was really interested and I'm always interested in this idea that no colonizer thinks they are bad. I think or thinks they're colonizers in general, probably. But there is a big part of that where, yes, aliens are coming to take over. And in a lot of movies, they are coming to destroy the world for themselves. But like, that's not necessarily what human history has shown us about colonizers. Like, there's kind of this great idea of like, like, we're going to bring the gospel or we're going to bring the truth, and then people resist it, and then that's when the fighting starts. And so I like the idea of these are not aliens that are necessarily coming in with ray guns and for combat. Like, they're basically coming in with the vaccine, and everyone's like, no thank you. And they're just like, take your fucking medicine, we know it's better for you. And then part of that was, and I talked to Caitlin about this a lot too, is imagining that people are all dogs and that the aliens are all people. And my dog is so scared when she goes to the vet. And there's no way to explain to her that it's good that you're going to the vet. Like, all she knows is she's getting needles and she's getting probed and all these things are happening to her because we as people have decided we know what's best for her. And I thought that should be how the aliens think about people, where there's an element of, yes, taking over, but they're not, like, the aliens only try to hurt her when she is being difficult. Like, if a dog bites someone, they could get put down. That's just kind of how our society works. Like, dogs get put down because no one adopts them. And so it was kind of putting that reversion onto the aliens where, like, yeah, they were coming in, they were walking into our homes the same way a person might walk into an alleyway where a stray dog is, trying to take the dog. that sometimes the dog gets, rehabilitated and trained and given to someone, and it's all lovely, and we see all the Instagram videos and we cry. And sometimes the dog bites a bunch and they put the bitch down. And to a dog, none of this makes sense. They have no agency of their own. And if that felt to me like the right place to put them, because again, trying to build out that idea of like intelligence wise, there is, light years between us. So why wouldn't they think of us as anything but a little thing to help? And then when they start getting hurt, they start getting mad. And but even at the end of it, a dog can bite someone a lot of times and not get put down because someone's just kind of like, I really believe in this dog. And to other dogs, that might not make any sense. And so that was something that we talked about a lot, was just making sure they felt intelligent, like making sure, like we could, even if Brynn didn't know their motivations, like the animators and everyone did, and the sound guys did, because they were talking, and just trying to build out that spectrum of what that story could be, again, without ever having an alien sit Brynn down and explain to her what's going on. Or they do, she just doesn't understand it. Like very specifically, there are lines of dialogue where they are telling her what's happening to her, and I think it's really funny. Because she just has no idea. Yeah.
Well, what is really, really, really unique and unlike anything I think I've seen in a movie like this before is Brynn survives this alien attack by stabbing one of them in the head. And then what happens next involves her opening her closet wrapped in a robe. She pulls out options of what to wear. It fills her with a tremendous amount of anxiety, you write.
Which I think we cut that, right?
I don't know. I think I seem to remember it, but maybe I'm misremembering it. I've been jumping back and forth.
Yeah, we shot it. I can't remember. It went back and forth a lot in the movie. Because I think that was Caitlin's favorite scene.
Well, yeah,
too.
because the idea of this girl, an Etsy seller who watches TCM, she's just murdered a telekinetic being from outer space. And the thing that's really causing her terror now after that experience is the prospect of going into town and broaching society. And, you described this earlier as a mystery. And funnily enough, around page 30, this takes place. You describe her biking down a quaint, boring American main street. A couple of people notice her go past. Is that her? She goes to the only place that could possibly help her, a police station, where, for reasons that we don't understand, this older woman, Mrs. Collins, spits in her face. And then you write, after a hideous beat, Mrs. Collins passes her and heads out the door. The police chief stays for a moment, like he knows he should apologize. But honestly, he just really doesn't fucking want to. It's suddenly very clear that Brynn is incredibly, incredibly hated in this town. That happens at what should be, the inciting. This is almost your first act break if we're going to use that traditional, screenwriting lingo. The mystery of this film then makes itself apparent as not being kind of the mystery of who are these aliens and what do they want with us. Instead, the mystery is, what the hell did Brynn do? And I'm fascinated how that came to be structured the way it is, because, like I say, I'm not sure I've seen an alien film that functions this way.
Yeah, so I think that's probably, I think, the moment where the two ideas got married for me, where I knew I really like this idea of starting a movie at the end of Signs. Like I remember seeing Signs in the theater, loving Signs. I'm a big M. Night guy. And then also there being a part of me that's just like, why are these dickheads bopping around for so long? Like, just go in the front. I love the idea. I remember having the idea of like, why don't they walk in? Like if they walked, instead of hopping on the roof in Signs, if they walked in, it would have been game over. And I'm reticent to talk too much about it because I'm a little embarrassed about it, but they do walk into someone else's house in Signs, and there's something very scary about that. And then there's other connections that people can probably make between the two movies, between that character and my movie. Which I did not think of until I was almost done shooting it. But I think I knew in the Alien movie I had that first act, Alien gets killed, because then you're just like, whoa, movie started, Alien shows up, crazy. Oh, first act ends, Alien's dead. Where's the next hour going? Knowing like probably the next night, you hope more aliens show up as a movie. And then I knew in the sad, boring indie movie about Brynn, at some point the revelation has to become apparent. And always hating the idea that it had to be someone basically Googled her, or she saw someone from her past show up and say, your child killed, whatever. And just never being able to wrap my brain around what that should be in a way that felt like a movie and that didn't just feel shitty. And then I think the marriage of the two ideas happened when I was just like, okay, this character kills an alien first act, and then what? And then they go into town and load up on guns or get help. And like you're like, every version of that sucks. Like there's no version of that is an enjoyable movie. Or everyone just goes, you're crazy. And that's kind of like, it's hard to be crazy when there's an alien in your house that you can show people. And then I was trying to be like, well, how do they take the alien back? But then if they take the alien back, like, why didn't they just kick ass again at that moment? So it was just like, that was like a stumbling block. So I had these two stumbling blocks on these two different projects. And then at one point, the thing merged in my head where it was, what if that's the moment that they go in and they try to get help, and then that character, you go, oh shit, we all know who you are and we hate you for the sin you've done. And then like instantly you get these two giant propulsive engines where Brynn as a character becomes more interesting than the aliens, which is really hard to do in a movie like this. But also the aliens become so much more dangerous because you realize this person is alone and there is not a prayer in the world for them. There's no like gather your friends, buy some guns. It just, that was the moment where the two things I felt like really like synced up. And then as soon as I thought of that, I was like off to the races, wrote the script really fast. And then all the like, oh, well, the aliens can also investigate her character in these interesting ways visually. Like it just became really fun. But that was the moment where it was just like, I'm stuck on two scripts inadvertently with the same problem. And then when the two problems became one problem, it became very easy to see, oh, this is why you tell this is the story of No One Will Save You that's beyond a genre exercise. There's like, oh, there's steak on the bone here. And then this is how I can tell this indie movie without being morbid and awful. And so that was the kind of inflection point where it's just like, oh, that's great. Like she's doing everything right. And I remember specifically thinking like, oh, and then you have a dead alien, and then she has to figure out what to wear that makes people believe her. And that was something, again, to talk about my crew, like Natalie O'Brien was my costume designer, and we talked a lot about Brynn, when she goes out in the world, kind of dresses down because she doesn't want people to see her and think she's thriving. And then she comes home and changes her clothes and looks much better. But she's very conscientious of, if someone sees me, I don't want them to go, look at her, she doesn't care. And that was true in that scene when she's picking out the outfit. It's kind of like, how do I look sane? But I know people hate me, but I need them to hear what I'm going to say because it's going to sound like I know it's going to sound absolutely insane. Um, and and we had little bits in there like cameras, like the when the alien died, it kind of EMPs the house, and so we like she can't take a picture of it. Like there's all these different things. Um, so it was like okay, she has to decide what to wear. So a character that and she knows the police chief is probably going to be there, and if he's not, all the cops know who she is, but she's going to say this insane thing. She's also going to tell a room full of cops that not only is there an alien, but she killed the alien, and kill being like the problem, where it's like, you know me as a killer, I killed again. And like, there's probably a part we talked about with Caitlin. There's probably a part of her that's just like, if I say I murdered, like, we're like, is there a version where Caitlin or where Brynn doesn't mention the alien and just goes, I killed someone, I'm turning myself in? And does that make the cops go, oh, then we'll go check out the house? And so like and Caitlin's walking up there, she's kind of going through all these different scenarios where she's like, what do I do to have someone listen to me, even if it's a lie? And then it just all goes to shit like immediately. But it was like that scene kind of came like, so that very long answer, but that was kind of how that was for me when I was just like, oh, I understand why I should make this movie, was when Mrs. Collins bid on Brynn, and I realized taking the two ideas and putting them into one idea just gave it so many different layers where I could get an actress like Caitlin to do the role, because it's a really complex and interesting character, as opposed to I'm just a girl that lives alone and now there's a boogeyman, invading my house. I think there needs to be, for actors of that caliber, and that again, that was not a knock on the Boogeyman movie, which I think is awesome too. I just meant in general the Boogeyman. But so that then it became like, oh, I can get a really, and that was also before I knew there's no dialogue. So it's like, oh, I can get a really great actor to do this role because there's so much they get to do, but then also they get to run away from aliens. Like it's like, and like that's exactly how we got Caitlin, because she was just like, amazing character, and I get to do all this shit I usually don't get to do in movies. And it was, that was really, I think I finished the script like 6 weeks after realizing that was the thing, because it was just like, oh, look at all these problems that you can just pile on.
So the fact that you had a dead alien in her house,
yeah,
is that why in the kind of scenes that follow we tend to get different variations on the threat? We first get the bus scene, which is such a great set piece, so claustrophobic, and it's a totally different texture to the other frights in the film. That introduces the idea of the aliens as body snatchers. We're then going to meet the alien you describe in the script as the little fucker, and then finally the daddy long legs abomination. Were you kind of conscious of like, well, we've already established that she can kill
that's
one
exactly
of them.
it.
Yeah. So how did you then, once you knew that you needed these different types of aliens, you needed the body snatchers, you needed the little fucker, and you needed the daddy long legs, how did you then kind of work out a mythology of what those creatures were versus the Greys that we've met already?
It kind of came backwards from the theme a little bit, where once I knew Brynn was going to be in No One Will Save You, it was like, oh, like that's really fun to kind of figure out like a little, like what is the ways where we get to have like the this is your life stuff, and like the psychotropic stuff, and just so the parasite kind of came out of that, where it was like, okay, this gives me a thing that the Greys can be doing, that you're like, well, they're taking over, they're putting us in the Matrix. And it kind of backfires because they give Brynn everything she's ever wanted, but she also is like, this is phony, I don't deserve this. And that, everyone else is watching the big game and their team win. It's like all these dreams coming true. You could hypothesize when the parasite goes in. But for Brynn, it's it's a dream coming true, but it's very painful and upsetting and beautiful and complicated in a way that she's just like, I know what's going on. I don't like this. So that's how the Parasite came out. And then part of it was wanting different threats. Um, because you kill an alien, if more aliens show up, you're like, why can't she do it again? Part of it, I think too, there's that version. And then there's like part of it was selfishly. Um, when the mothership lands in Close Encounters, there's and this was a reshoot Spielberg did, but they have this big spindly alien kind of come out and then disappear, and he's never seen again. And it was like Spielberg was like, we just need a little bit of a jolt, and they put that in, and I always loved that motherfucker. And I was just like, at some point, I want to have like this weirdo show up, and then that became, well, I there's a religious aspect to the aliens, and it's really fun if we can have like a priest character. Like, what does that feel like? And then I don't think the movements are in the script. I think that came out of just talking with department heads and Sarah, my VFX producer. And then suddenly it became like, oh, well, like how would you convey that idea? And it was like, oh, he kind of summons the UFOs, which is, you would get kind of just by the fact that he's there, and then UFO shows up, but it's not that clean, it's not that clear. And then also, why isn't he just bulldozing down the house because he's giant? And then you're kind of like, oh, well, narratively, it's really fun if he has these like arm gesture, like he's kind of praying, arm gestures, UFO shows up. So you're like, okay, there's this weird God link between the shaman and the UFO. And then Caitlin ruins it. And then you have an alien that wasn't that angry, and it was just kind of goofy beforehand. And then she embarrasses him. And you're like, okay, this guy's performing mass. And then this girl just took a shit in the middle of mass. And all of his buddies are going to laugh at him. And he just gets really mad and tries to put her in her place. So then that became like, okay, you can really build out that character in a really great way. And then the little fucker was, again, like, it came out of wanting there to be a different kind of threat, like a threat that she had to like physically tangle with. And it just became little bits of, and I think it got changed, it got cut a little bit, and I can't remember why now because it's been so long, but like there's this idea that they were kind of like the little minor as an excavating part of the race, but they also kind of had like a little brother relationship with the Greys that were kind of like the brains, but they treated them well, and this idea of like the whole backstory is like, these are the guys that like dig for food under the sea and like give them, they kind of are the providers, but also have this really lovely brotherly relationship with the Greys, and that Brynn killed his buddy. And then it became this thing. And again, he's never trying to kill Brynn. He keeps trying to grab her and then that was an important kind of thing that we were trying to make the distinction of that he's not like, he could murder her at a couple points and chooses not to with his claws. And then that's interesting. And then he also starts praying at one point, which again is just finding all these little ways that you can just build this kind of weird culture so that you're like, I don't know what the fuck they're doing, and it's weird. But there's a thing that they're doing that suggests a higher community and a bigger movie than I'm seeing. Like there's probably like the $400 million version of this, but I'm just seeing this like real little snapshot. So it just kind of evolved from there in terms of like using different aliens to give little peekaboos at different cultures, giving Brynn different physical obstacles she would have to overcome. And then I was like, if she kills a really big one, she's gonna get a little too cocky, and then it all kind of goes south for her. And so it just kind of all stemmed from that. Yeah. then again, I just was like, I want the action figures, which I didn't get. But I was
Not
like,
yet.
I like the idea of that. I was just like, yeah, there should be more than one. And then, again, I think there's always the fear of like audiences getting bored or just feeling safe. And then it's just like, okay, like we're throwing every scene is a problem for Brynn. Um, as opposed to oh, it's just more grays doing their thing. And like even that's why the gray in the basement, um, that scene kind of starts off like the first act of the movie for a minute or two, and then he's just like sitting behind her. And that was our whole point there, was just to kind of be like, it's not going to be the first act of the movie anymore. Like we're we're playing a little cute, but once he's behind her, you're just kind of like, oh yeah, like they know they're here, they want her, like it's over. And then so that was just always a way of like, how do you kind of refresh the movie every 5 minutes, to keep audiences paying attention to the dialogue-free alien movie with a girl that killed another girl when she was 10.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's something you said there about like the religious component of it. Made me kind of call back to what you said about what you said at the top of this conversation about how so many colonizers are doing so in the name of religion. Like there's something that rings true with our human experience of colonization, I suppose. I should ask as well, Brian, about like it's here where you begin to really kind of like I guess answer the question of the mystery. We get to understand what happened with Maud. Like there's a scene in which in the script, like this one of the Greys kind of gets into this room that is referred to in the script as the room, and Brynn she sees the Greys investigating, as you put it, all these boxes upon boxes full of letters that Brynn wrote all to one person, someone called Maud. And as this kind of sequence goes on, she's going to be offered like a reunion with Maud that she ultimately rejects, that she knows not to be real. And then what follows is this kind of like incredibly lyrical sequence in which she meets her doppelganger, essentially the anti-Brynn, as you describe her. And this is like a really kind of like the kind of personal journey that she's on is really coming to the fore in and amidst all this kind of like alien chaos around her. Can you tell me about like, knitting this all together? There's obviously something very metaphorical happening in the sense of Brynn killing herself, killing a part of herself in order to move on. Talk to me about how it all came together.
I think it became this idea of knowing that the first act is Raptors in the kitchen, and then the second act, it's kind of two acts a little bit. It's the second act is trying to escape home and then going back home, and then a bunch of action scenes, and then just kind of knowing that Brynn is a 5'2" girl. She's not going to blow up the Death Star, which I know annoyed so many people. That was not where this movie was going. But I was just like, it's not knocking her character that she is not equipped to do that. And then it was just kind of like, okay, so as a movie, where do we go? And then as a character, where can Brynn go? Because the action is so fun, but it doesn't lend itself as the action is a blast, but the genre element gives me the opportunity to do weird shit and do weird shit that is very personally involving for Brynn. And so wanting to get to that point where knowing Brynn had to get captured at some point, knowing she had to get parasited, and that mod element would be there. And then what happens, is kind of the fun. Like, how do you get worse than that? And I think the anti-Brynn was that was like a really hard plan, and I'm still somewhat torn about how I did. But I think that was partially, it was just like in the aliens' brains, I have a reason for why they did that. For Caitlin, it felt like that was like so much worse, or for Brynn, like that's even a worse problem in a lot of ways than the aliens. And then wanting Brynn to like there, I think there's an element in this movie, and again, not to get morbid, but there's an element to, I think, and I talked with this about Deaver a lot, where it's just like, why is Brynn alive? Like that is a there's a subtext to the character there where it's like, why is like, and it's not just the like, why is she fighting back? Because I think that's just an animal reaction. But knowing like, let's put Brynn in a place where she can call it, and at the anti-Brynn scene, like there is a better, prettier version of herself that can go off into the world, probably is doing the right thing and getting rid of OG Brynn, who is a murderer herself, who most people don't think paid enough of a price. Like having there be a moment where it's just kind of like there be like this option to be like, all right, I'm calling it. Fuck it. Like I'm stabbed. This is the better version of me. I'm out. And then her finding this part of herself that does fight back and doesn't quite know why. And it's not really textual. Like none of this is text, but it felt like having that was really important. That in a way that it didn't come like the anti-Brynn came from the aliens, but I think there's something about having a version of yourself that is better than you, like the version of yourself that could go out into the world that's clean. It's like Caitlin looks like shit. I mean, they're both Caitlin, but Brynn looks like shit. And then this other one looks like $1,000,000. And red carpet Caitlin doesn't have those blemishes. And it just felt like a really interesting place to put that character before going to the finale. And then also kind of wanting to play fair too, where I really wanted Caitlin to be, or I know I'm going to keep calling Caitlin Brynn, but really wanting Caitlin to be as fucked up as possible, and like not being like kind of trying to like give a heads up that this is not going, like she is not going to Tom Cruise this shit. And we talk about Tom Cruise all the time on set because there's a lot of Tom Cruise that Caitlin does. Like her running is very Tom Cruise intentionally, and then kind of not wanting the audience to be, I think wanting the audience to think that Caitlin was going to die and not that she was going to save the day. And then of course we have like a completely third different conclusion for her. But I think wanting it to get to that, like she is a 5'2" girl against gods, and there's no like she's bought herself a little bit of time, but there's no winning. Like there's no she's not winning this movie. I mean she does, but not in the way that I think people anticipate. And so I think that was something that was important to start kind of laying the groundwork for the audience, but then also really kind of having that character kind of go through my home is gone and I've rejected the pill, and now I've rejected a better version of myself living out in the world, and then putting her at a place where she's so far below ground zero that it's just kind of like what is even left of Brynn after the anti-Brynn encounter. And then we just go off the rails.
Well, let's talk about going off the rails, because there's a pivotal scene in the film that isn't in this first draft.
I never shot that scene too.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you're talking about the UFO.
Yeah, I'm talking about like the conversation that the aliens have about Brynn, where they seemingly come to a decision to spare her. That's not something that's in this draft. So talk to me about like how that came to be.
This is going to be a really long answer too. I'm so sorry to listeners. I think it's longer already than the fucking movie. But the original scene is essentially the UFO, but it takes place on a road. And it's the road that Brynn encounters the giant daddy long legs in. And originally that's just a solitary gray, and she gets trapped in the light, and they have this weird interaction, and out of nowhere the alien and you see how Maud died, you see all this stuff, and then the alien chooses to spare Brynn, which spins us off into our finale. So I brought up the weather problems before. So we had terrible storms when we were on that road that we couldn't go back to. So we basically shot like the masters there because we had so little time. And then we shot plates for the forest. So it, which is not my ideal version, but the upside of Caitlin being trapped in a beam was that we could shoot that on a stage and on blue screen. So that was like our weather compromise, and it sucked, but it is what it is. But it was always something that it never felt like it never had all the pieces just because of weather shutdowns. And it was just like we just had terrible storms for the nights we had that road, and then we couldn't go back to the road. And, it happens. It's making movies. And then, like I said before, testing process was a disaster on the movie for a million different reasons. But we all kind of suspected that it wasn't the quality of the movie, which I don't know if another studio would have gone with. Did that? Our scores were so low and there was so much confusion, but there was no sound design. There was like, I'm not kidding, like audiences would laugh because we would just have like a JPEG bop into frame and chase Caitlin around at times.
Please release the JPEG cut.
Oh, it's brutal. And then so first screening was just disaster. Second screening had just by happenstance, the visual effects were kind of started from the start of the movie and then was moving towards the end. So then we kind of lost so we had like an hour where the audience was like locked in, and then we lost the audience partially because of some pacing stuff, but I think also mostly because there's like a moment where they all burst into laughter because we reverted back to JPEGs. And then our ending scene was always a shit show because of our weather constraints and our problems. But then also it's the most performance heavy alien, but we never had an alien. We only had like some post fizz or or like just basically a cardboard cutout in that scene. And so every time we showed the movie to people, everyone was just like, the ending with the alien is so unsatisfying. And then it was this problem where audiences and buddies, like everyone was saying that, but the scene is like 10% done. It looks like even like the plates look weird, and like I told Asbel, I was like, I feel like testing a movie like this is like taking a 3-month-old fetus out of a woman, and kind of being like, look how cute this is, and it's very upsetting and awful. And it's like the baby is going to become a 9-month-old that is born and is so cute. Like nothing has to change, but the process. But how do you not test a movie like this? But also, it's so hard to test a movie like this because every character in the movie, except for one, is an alien that is not what you're testing. And so it just becomes this big mess where you're kind of like, and to Asbel's credit, and I don't think a lot of other studio heads would have been so cool. Like he loved the movie and he was like, I believe this movie is going to become this 9-month-old baby eventually. But we have this problem where everyone is saying this ending is really unsatisfying. How do we do we just go with our guts, or is there like a version that we can solve? And then and then we were just like shooting ideas around, and I was like, well, I have all of Caitlin on blue screen in frozen in the light beam. I have all these angles of Caitlin. And I think a bunch of audiences said it felt small. And then we were just like, what's like the biggest fucking thing we should do? And then we were like, let's just put her in the ship. And add like tons of aliens. And I was very nervous about that because, again, I think because of Close Encounters. And like their ending. But And so it's been like this thing that I think December, before we delivered the movie in February, we went to the studio and we're like, we made like a really shitty version of um Caitlin, and like basically like storyboard a version of what a UFO ending would look like, including like moving Caitlin so that eye lines had to work and all these different things. And it was like kind of a nightmare because it's not how I would have shot any of it if it was in a UFO. Um, and then but it was also trying to hit a note that I didn't know it was an actual note. And so it was like this very weird thing. But then I was also like, if it can be cool, great. Um, and then Asbel said yes, and they put like a little bit of money into it. And then I had to like call Caitlin and be like, you are now in this other location. And I don't think she was thrilled about it. Not for, I think she thinks it's cool, but it's like she's such a specific performer that I think like me, like how that's not how I would have shot it. She was now like, that's not how I would have performed it if I was in, like, Caitlin's great. Like if I put like a shot of her that was originally later in a scene to earlier in a scene, she'll be like, that's not the right performance I'm giving because you're off. And I'm like, no one notices but you. Um, but like she's so technical an actor. But it was this kind of thing, like we were like, maybe this is cool or better. But then like everyone rushed to finish it. And then no one saw it until the movie came out, including like I realized I didn't tell a bunch of department heads that had changed. So they only found out about the UFO at the um premiere, because there wasn't even like a reshoot. It was like and I had most of my department heads for the reshoots. And so it was like this very strange thing. And I think I like it. I still I think it's cool. But there's also part of me that was not like resentful, like that's way too strong a word, but it also is kind of like it, like the original ending never really got its fair day in court. And so that made me really, and I think that was a good filmmaking lesson. Like I think to do it over again, I would have started deneg on the ending first, knowing that it was such a pivotal part of the movie. But then again, part of our testing process, you were just trying to front load how great the movie could look so that the audience would then go, even if it looks shitty, I'll understand. But I sacrificed the aliens' performance at the end to buy that hour that they were in. And it didn't, so it was just kind of like there's no winning of it, but it was like a very interesting, like completely constructed in post answer to a question that I don't know if it was a question and I'll never know. But the studio got really behind it and put money into it. And look, I think a ton of aliens are better than no aliens. And the upside too is I got to put God in the movie, which I think thematically kind of really ties a bow on all of that shit in a nice way. So it's very complicated, and I have weird mixed feelings about it, but I also don't know what I would have done differently. Because also I think if I had written that UFO ending into the script, I think it probably would have gone away because of budget to make the movie. So it's like a very interesting yeah, very I don't know, it's weird. So I can't imagine I'll ever go through a similar scenario in my life as that one. But I got really lucky that I was at a really great studio that didn't punish me because of audiences being confused, because I don't know if another studio would have given a shit if audiences were confused because there are no visual effects in a scene where a character is interacting with a visual effect character. Or sometimes was a guy in a green leotard, which is not intimidating at all. Like I don't know if other places would have given me like the benefit of the doubt off of spontaneous in a way that Steve and JR did. So very, very lucky, very grateful, but it is a weird scenario. After the movie came out, the Writers Guild asked for the script for like the library and for like the WGA awards and stuff. And I was going to send it, and I was like, oh fuck, I've never written the ending of the movie like ever in my life. Like it was never written down. So I had to do a new draft like 3 months after the movie came out, writing the ending for the first time. And I remember I think telling someone, I was just like, like writing never ends, but like typically it ends when the movie is delivered. And I was like, I'm writing this stupid movie. Like, it's out. It's been out for months. And it was because the UFO was never ever written. It was um like this it just never existed because I never had to give anyone sides. Like Caitlin's performance was for a different location. Um and then we just made like little animatics to send to the DNEG about what the aliens were doing and stuff. So it was, yeah, I finished writing the movie like 3 months after it came out. I felt like the dumbest version of like when Peter Jackson's directing scenes for Return of the King extended editions after winning the Oscar. It was like that was, I was like, oh, this is very surreal and strange.
It's such a highly interpretable ending, Brian. Like it's not just a case of like different people have different reads on what's happening in that final scene. Every time I go back to the end, like every time I rewatch the film, sometimes I see it as like a triumph. The aliens have seen something in Brynn's resistance and that they've rewarded her with her life. There are other times where it seems not quite a punishment, but something more tragic, certainly, where it's like she's already kind of stuck in some sort of strange bubble in the way that like everyone else who's now been body snatched, if you like, they're now going to be in that bubble. Can you talk to me about like, obviously though it seems very purposeful, the fact that, you made it that ambiguous. Talk me through how, like what you wanted the audience to come away with and to whatever degree you're comfortable, what you had in your mind in terms of what's happening in those final moments.
Oh, I definitely know. And I think it was a couple things. It was like, what is the natural place for Brynn to go to? Like knowing she can't blow up the Death Star. And I know there was like a lot of flack about that. And then I did not want her to die. Um, because I just love her too much. And I was just like, I love some of those horror movies where like the lead dies at the end. Too, but I was just like, that's not my personal vibe. And also I was just like so much of the work of the movie is that you love this girl and then you have conflicted feelings about loving this girl, but you're also like, I don't think she deserves to die. Like once you find out about Molly, she's not a psychopath. It was an accident. She was so young, but I don't love the feelings I'm feeling. Like I like that soup. And I was just like, if she dies, you're just kind of like, the movie's basically being like, yeah, fuck you. So I knew it couldn't be that. And I had the idea for the dance pretty early where I like this idea that she trying to like not like say too much. Well, I'll say some people think the ending is like a death dream, and I think everything that happens in the movie happens, and that she's not parasited at the end, and that was something we had to clarify with that little pickup too. That like other people are, she is not. But wanting there to be something that she gets that she didn't have before. That is not necessarily. She definitely has feelings about it. And I think part of it came out of I love both Invasions of the Body Snatchers. And there's like the famous ending, the Donald Sutherland ending, where they freak out when they find her. And then there's also just a part of me that is kind of like, well, why would they give a shit? Like what is this one lady gonna do? And then kind of going back to the dogs thing, it was like, okay, Brynn has bit a bunch of people, and they could put her down, or they could rehabilitate her in their own way. And then you can go down the path, like we talked about this idea, like aliens don't understand what grief is. And so the fact that Brynn has all this grief is just an interesting thing to them. And then we talked about the aliens are intentionally not destroying things if they can help it, because they have a love for culture. And that also can go into like this emotional space where a lot of these people, they probably aren't digging around into the way they are Brynn. And then they dig around into Brynn and they're just like, this is interesting. Like it'd be a shame to lose it. And then you also have this idea that Brynn can create worlds and it can ostensibly be a teacher for the aliens about how to be people. So there's all that kind of stuff in there. And then it's funny because I knew the ending was going to be like really triggering or problematic for some people. And I always loved it, but there's like this trend in movies, and I think I really started noticing this as a director, where, and I don't want to give examples, but I'll see a director do something that's very provocative, and I'll go, I'll feel it so deeply in my bones, and I'll be like, the only reason you did that is so that when people don't like the movie, you can say, yeah, they just couldn't hang with it. It's not for everybody. Like it's like that. There's two examples that are very clear in my mind, but there's like a thing where there's just kind of it's kind of like a little bit of a swagger where it's just like, this movie's not for everybody. And I think when I was younger, I thought that was cool. And I think the older I get and the more I direct, the more I think I feel that is very insecure. And it kind of is buffering you from criticism, or it's allowing you the escape hatch to criticism, because you can just say, that critic or that person, it just wasn't for them. And like, there's obviously movies that are not for everybody, but sometimes there are just those scenes that are provocative, that I feel like are the director being insecure as opposed to truthful. And so that was my big nightmare about the dance, where I was like, I know this is a very left field ending, and I've gotten the tweets that tell me some people don't like it. But I was like, I went with it, and the studio always went with it too, which was amazing. But I went with it because I loved Brynn, and I kicked this 20-year-old's ass for 90 minutes, and also said, hey, before this movie even started, look at how shit her life was. And I liked the idea that it wasn't necessarily a good or bad ending. In terms of morally, you can definitely make arguments both ways. And Caitlin and I and everyone have talked about at length, like the different moral implications of that ending. Because it's quite sticky and thorny in a way that also I'm like, well, there goes 15 points at the test. And so, but I was also like, I wanted to leave, and I knew, for me, there was a part of the movie where I was like, this movie is kind of only worth telling, and it's really only worth kicking this girl's ass as hard as we do, if she but she has to be happy at the end of the movie, and like all the different things you can weigh into that. But I was just like, if this movie doesn't end with her smiling, I was just like, I don't understand why I'm making the movie. And then the dance just became, well, like, what is this thing that she wants that's also not real, but it's also like, what are her options at this point? Like if the ending really happens, which I think I've said it does, is she going to kill herself? Like, no. We've just seen her not kill herself. Um, and then it's like, is she going to fight back? And then you're just like, in what scene could I possibly show that has her figuring out like how to sneak a nuke up to a UFO? Like there's just no uh thing like that. And then but also that's not like a happy Brynn. Like that is a different path. And so it just kind of became like, okay, like what is this happy ending I can give her? That's not like, and I can't do it's a dream or it's a parasite because we've already rejected that. And so it feels weird to be like, and then they just put it back in her, and she's this time she's in the Matrix. And so it kind of stemmed out of how do I get this character a happy ending because narratively she deserves it, and I've made aliens that are not destructive, um, necessarily, and so it doesn't really make sense that at this point in the movie they would off her, and I can't put her in a. So it's like all these kind of things kind of got taken away because I also don't outline as I go, and it would probably make my life easier if I did, but I hate outlining. I just write as I go. And so kind of as I was approaching the ending, I was like, I'm losing options. Or there are options that I think some audiences probably would prefer that I'm just like, I just can't wrap my head around how she can defeat aliens or all these different things or be punished or be killed or whatever. And so I kind of was like, I think this is a provocative ending. I think it's going to lose me audience and critics at some of them. But it's also like this feels like the ending to the movie thematically for Brynn, thematically for the aliens, thematically for the story the movie is telling. Like it's definitely a little uh bananas, but and also there's also the opportunity. I just never thought of a better ending. Um uh but that was something I internally wrestled with a lot, and I know people wrestle with a lot with the movie. But I was just like, I can't think of another option that is true to her character and that is true to my selfish desire that this girl who I've inferred has had a miserable 15 years, and now a miserable movie on top of it. I just want her to be happy. Well, everything we've talked about with the aliens, as well, that's not textual, but is you can definitely read into. You're like that ending makes a lot of sense for our grays, and there's the ending is supported throughout the movie, and I feel confident about that. But there was also part of me that was just like, I'm hoping I'm not doing the thing I find so irritating and insecure where I'm like, yeah, you just couldn't like if you don't like it, I totally get it, and I think it's fair. Um and uh but yeah, I went with it, and I decided it wasn't insecure shielding from criticism because I was like, but Brynn's happy at the end, and I was like that feels like if that wasn't where this movie was heading, because so much of the movie is her trying to figure out what being happy is, even if it's just the first 8 minutes, really. Like that feels like the prize she has to win. Because of the self-forgiveness she like because of all these different things she goes through in the movie. Um, and I was like, what would make her happiest? And it's a goofy dance.
Yeah, I mean, to go back to that kind of description that I threw at you earlier, quoting you from 10 years ago, the idea of like monster cinema involving kind of physical obstacles to overcome so that a character can overcome something inwardly. She begins the film wanting self-forgiveness and wanting community. And in that final scene, she has all those things. It's just that there's this kind of moral question. Is it like, on one hand, it's quite picturesque and people are getting along, and as a community, it feels almost as idyllic as the little model town that she's built for herself in those opening scenes. But of course, like, yeah, it's that Matrix question of like, are we happier plugged into the machine or not?
Yeah, and the big thing for me too is that the Collinses are not in the ending. Like that for me is the like not like the key to it, but it's like there are people in the ending that are most of them you haven't seen before, and the ones that you have are just kind of shitty to her. Um, but Brynn absolutely thinks the Collinses deserve all of their feelings towards her. Like I think if they were in the ending as happy and idyllic, that would be really fucked up and dark. And we talked about like there was like versions of the movie where we were trying to have Brynn like save the Collinses, but then it's just kind of like they don't need to like I was just like I was like they don't need to ever forgive her like or like her doing like a task for them like there's not like she ruined their lives and she will always have ruined their lives and there's nothing she can do including saving their lives like they probably wish they were dead. They went through the worst thing possible and so that was something we talked a lot about where it was like Brynn is remorseful but like what are the options here um and what does she owe people that hated her that never knew anything about her like she would be the first one to be like the Collinses deserve to hate me like she's very clear about that but everyone else is just like you know she has two friend groups in this movie and one friend group treated her a lot better bizarrely in a lot of emotional ways than the other and so I think it's a very fun Twilight Zone-y moral quandary but I also yeah I never thought of an ending that I thought was more Brynn than that one I guess yeah and I know like I'm not doing they're not going to get a cold and die the aliens it's like okay so what is the thing like there's not like a virus like what like you can't go down these paths because I'm making such efforts to be like look how efficient and smart they are that you know and also then I get on top of that I'm like and also they are religious and also there's definitely a presence of God on their side in the text of the movie that you feel at the end and so then you're just kind of like okay well if these are colonizers and their God is the one true God hard to wipe them out and so then you just get into this other where I was just like okay like how does Brynn relate to killing them or if they're killed by this other thing that it's not going to be from this small town with Brynn and then it's going to be so confusing where you can't explain to Brynn what's happened and how they got defeated in a way that I think if they got defeated off camera you would feel really disappointed as an audience and I think rightfully so but yeah it's all fun. I'll probably think of a great ending in like 5 years.
This is the bit of the conversation where typically, Brian, our attention kind of drifts to the future and to what type of stories you might want to tell next. This is, of course, a film that, as an advert for what you do as a writer and director, I think it got you on a lot more people's radars, even more so than Spontaneous and everything that came before it. That, of course, opens up doors for you. Presumably, you're at a point now where you have a lot of options in terms of what types of stories to write next and what types of stories to direct next. News broke last week that Universal was on the hunt. Well, what's coming, and I'm only bringing it up because there was a recent tweet by Liz Hannah, past Script Apart guest Liz Hannah, incredible writer. I'm just going to read out Liz's tweet.
I know Liz's tweet.
Yeah. Let Brian Duffield direct Jurassic Park, you crazies. I love that sentiment, and I wanted just to read that tweet aloud as a window into the question of where you want to go next. You've proved now that you can tell this kind of big budget spectacle. Not that this had the biggest budget of all, but you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
Are you interested in that type of franchise filmmaking? You have mentioned Jurassic Park a number of times in this conversation. Is that somewhere you want
Yeah.
to go? Or, I know you've dipped your toes into it a bit with Insurgent. When you look to the future now and you start to take advantage of the doors this movie blew open for you, which doors do you see yourself going through?
Uh, the Jurassic thing is very complicated right now. Um, uh, I think there are very few franchises that I would aggressively put my hat in the ring for, and there's probably one that I would aggressively try to get. That I don't know if I have the juice yet to get, but um, I think everyone who knows me uh knows how I feel about certain franchises. And so there's one of them that I would love to get that as of yet I have not gotten. Which is totally fine, and I'd probably be miserable if I ever got it. But so I think the Jurassic thing is just very complicated because of what happened last week. um, but I think in general, that's not where I see myself. I think I grew up really spoiled by Spielberg and really spoiled by Shyamalan. And like those were my guys. And I think what was so exciting about them was that they they weren't like the 17th Spider-Man. Like, and if like they call me about doing like a Tom Holland Spider-Man, I would take that meeting. I think I would have a lot of fun with it. So it's not like a never say never kind of thing, but I think we're getting at the franchise filmmaking at this point. I think it's getting to a place where it's not, at least for me, at least at the time in my career where I'm at, like it's not like, oh, you're the first one to get to do this IP. It's I loved the Batman, but it's ninth Batman we've had. Um, and again, I think the IPs are kind of becoming Shakespearean in a way where it's just like every year you can have, Macbeth, and there is an interesting director perspective on Macbeth or an actor that has made it interesting for hundreds of years. And I think that's where we're heading with the Batmans and the Supermans and the Jurassics and everything, which is great. And I think I could have a lot of fun there. But I mean, not to be like crass about it, but I made a silent alien original movie for $30 million for a major studio. I'm kind of like, well, what else can I get away with in the original space? And again, like it's not even because I'm like a big original nut. But I've been really like, I made an Exploding Teens rom-com, and I made a silent alien, a dialogue-free alien, mostly dialogue-free alien. And it like until someone says I can't do stuff without doing like an IP thing, which is something that very likely will happen at some point too. But it hasn't happened to me yet. So there's a part of me that just wants to see how long this road stretches out ahead of me. And then if I do wind up doing like a franchise thing, I wouldn't think it's selling out just because, like I've said a bunch of times on this lengthy Zoom, I'm a big movie guy, and I think I really do want to direct like $150 million movie someday, and odds are that will not be original. Just by the nature of the business and everything. But if I do it, I really want it to be my voice and my crew, and like it's my thing. It's like it's like what would the Wachowskis do, and that's kind of the lane I want to live in. Like even if they're doing IP, there it's so I'm Spielberg, Shyamalan, and the Wachowskis. And the Wachowskis just gotten more interesting as I've gotten older, and as they've made more batshit stuff. But yeah, like I was just watching Speed Racer with my boy, and I was just like, oh man, like it's so stunning and original, but it's an IP, but it's like it has none of the baggage that I put onto IP filmmaking. Or I think most people when they talk about IP filmmaking have like that sneer, but you're like, I don't think it needs that. I think it just needs authors. And I think right now I am, for better or worse, like No One Will Save You and Spontaneous are definitely movies that I authored and birthed, with a lot of people contributing. And I just want to keep living in that space until inevitably, I have to, I lose some of that power, and then I'll do something. But again, my hope is that it's funny because I think I'm very popcorn, in a lot of ways. So I don't think I'm that weird, and then I find out that I'm weirder than I think I am when things come out. So, but yeah, again, yeah, the Jurassic thing threw me, but in general, original. I'll text you if I magically get a new job this week.
Yeah, please do, Brian. Yeah, I'd appreciate that.
Yeah, I don't think it's in the cards, but I've definitely been wildly waving my hands at anyone that will notice for the last like year and a half. So but it's fine.
Yeah. Well, whatever you do next, Brian, whether it's Jurassic, or whether it's something completely different, I'm so excited because, I love your work, and I've loved this conversation today, man. This has been a long time coming for us. So thanks so much for coming on Script Apart.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you so much.
You've been listening to Script Apart. Thank you so much for tuning in. A reminder that if you want to help the show continue to grow, you can join us on Patreon by visiting patreon.com/scriptapart or clicking the link in today's show notes. Thanks again for joining us. We'll see you next time.